Parmarthaya pratibodhidam bhagavata narayanena swayam vyasena gradhidam purana munina madhye mahabharatam advaidamritavarshinim bhagavadim ashtadashadhyayinim ambattva manusandadhami Bhagavad Gita bhavadveshinim yam brahma varunendra rudra marudastunnanti divyastavaihi Vedai Sangapadakramopaniषदे गायन्ति यं सामगाः ध्यानावस्थिततद्गतेन मनसा पश्यन्ति यं योगिनो यस्यान्दं न विदुस्सुरासुरगणाः देवाय तस्मै नमः. We are continuing our discussion on the 14th verse of the 8th chapter. Before that, we already discussed a very important topic in Vedanta, that is the method of meditating on the symbol, the supreme word symbol called Om, that we already discussed. It should be kept in mind that this method of meditation is very elaborately discussed in many scriptures, especially in the Mandukya Upanishad, which Shankaracharya's very elaborate commentary and discussions and interpretations, and also in many other works like Gaudapada Karika, of course, and then Yoga Vasishtha. And of course, it is also incidentally a topic that comes for discussion in the commentaries on Yoga Sutras also. So what should be kept in mind, it is a sound symbol. It is not the letter that we meditate upon, but it is the sound symbol. Because the sound Om doesn't necessarily indicate a monotheistic God idea. Rather, it corresponds to the totality of all that exists in the past, present and future, the finite and the infinite, the indescribable, the transcendental reality. And this method of meditation is traditionally prescribed for those who cannot grasp the highest spiritual truth when the instruction is given. Anyway, that is a different subject which comes for elaborate interpretation in the Mandukya commentary by Shankaracharya. Now we'll go to the 14th verse, which is very significant. Ananya cheta sadatam yo mam smarati nityashaha tasyakam sulabha partha nitya yuktasya yogina. Lord Krishna says that I am easily accessible. The highest reality can be easily realized in our own life by those who are always steadfast in their spiritual practices, who remembers the Lord all the time, constantly, every day, with a mind that is totally focused without any distraction, without any dissipation. This is a central idea. Now, it has got many, many interpretations. You can say that this is the central thesis of all schools of mysticism in all spiritual traditions. The steadfastness, the total focus, that's what really happens when you are devoted to a great spiritual idea. It could be Jesus, it could be Buddha, it could be any of the great Vedantic ideas, deities, Shiva, Vishnu, Devi, or in any tradition for the matter. when our mind doesn't waver, when our mind becomes steadfast and completely focused on something, then it absorbs. And then what that mind is focused on becomes a reality, and Sri Ramakrishna says, not an idea but a physical reality. So Sri Ramakrishna told his monastic disciples and also non-monastic disciples that God can be realized, and that's how Sri Ramakrishna convinced Vivekananda, who was at that time an agnostic student, that God can be seen. I can see Him the way I am seeing you in front of me, and you too can see. Now, what is the real meaning of the seeing here? That's it. Now, really speaking, from an absolute point of view, it cannot be explained. But we can get an idea of it. When we focus on some higher spiritual idea, then that idea becomes more and more concrete for us. It becomes less and less abstract. But for that, we should raise our mind to such a level that constant remembrance becomes a natural, effortless, spontaneous experience. If you look at the commentary and if you read the great devotional classics of Vedanta like Bhagavad Purana or Vedantic tradition, Hindu tradition, Bhagavad Purana, Shandilya Sutras, Narada Bhakti Sutras, all these great devotional mystical classics you find, this is the central idea that is emphasized again and again, and this is precisely what you find in the writings, in the lives of great Christian mystics, like the great Russian Christian mystics, Russian Orthodox tradition, and also in the lives of Saint John of the Cross, Saint Teresa of Avila, or any of these great spiritual. In fact, that's what you find in the life. It means when our spiritual life goes beyond the rituals, the mere belief systems, ideologies, ideas and concepts and philosophical doctrines, when they go beyond all these, when they reach a level of reality, a physical reality, that state can be called this mystical state, and it can be reached only through this ananya cheta. It means mind, chedas mean mind, which is not disturbed or it's not deviated towards anything else. Complete focus. That's why in the Yoga Sutra, Patanjali has got a famous sutra. It is Sadhu Dirghakala Nairandirya Satkara Asevido Dirdhabhumi. Sadhu Dirghakala Nairandirya Satkara Asevido Dirdhabhumi. That is Patanjali Sutra. It comes in the Samadhipada. That yoga has to be practiced for a long time. That's why, there is really no weekend in spiritual life, what we call holidays. In spiritual life, there is no weekend, no holidays. Well, for some days I shall live a material life, then I shall lead a spiritual life. It's not going to happen because we are working with the same mind. That's why it should be continuous and for a long time. Nairantarya means without any break, totally continuous, unbroken, and for a long time. The Shankaracharya says not for 6 months or 1 year or anything like that, but for a long time. And Satkara, Asevidu, Dirdhabhumi. Satkara means you have to, a sense of sanctity, sacredness, respect, honor. In fact, you will be able to practice an idea or an ideal or continue a practice for a very long time without any break only when we respect, when we accept that idea with a sense of sanctity and sacredness, there's a giving honor to that idea, respecting that idea, attributing a sense of sanctity and sacredness to that idea. Then we will be able to practice for a long time. It becomes our ideal. Our mind automatically goes towards that idea. That's precisely what you find if you write the elaborate writings of St. Teresa of Avila. There is no end to referring, but this is what you find on St. John of the Cross. Any great spiritual persons you find, in any tradition, any spiritual tradition where religion has gone beyond the mechanical, beyond the hierarchical, beyond the doctrinal, and which reach a level of reality, real experience. Now, how does a person reach this stage? For that, Patanjali again, Patanjali's system, Patanjali Yoga Sutras, of course, along with commentaries. Patanjali is very brief, he doesn't explain many of these things. But in yoga tradition, there is an elaborate description of how our mind actually works. So it's called Kshiptam, Mudham, Vikshiptam, Ekagram, Niruddham, or Ekagram, Niruddham. These are the 5 states of human mind. You can think of a lake. Suppose the lake is so muddy, so completely, you can't see anything, only muddy pool. It is Kshiptam state. And again, Mudha state, maybe a little clarity may be there, but by and large it is highly disturbed, lot of mud and filth is mixed with water, so nothing is seen. These 2 states, in their extreme conditions, refer to some degree of abnormality. Of course, not necessarily, because sometimes when we try to read a spiritual book, our mind becomes extremely disturbed. But when the same mind is diverted towards some kind of a comics or entertainment or something, then mind can readily accept, mind gets highly focused. So we can test our mind, if our mind can withstand the assault of great spiritual ideas and stay undisturbed, then you can congratulate yourself, you can congratulate your mind. If your mind gets terribly disturbed, when we read some wonderful book, we listen to some wonderful ideas, when we interact with some people and discuss some higher ideas, then mind gets suddenly restless. It goes. But if you talk about something extremely not so desirable, that's all we can say in the mildest possible language, which is highly high-catching, entertaining. Very often, then mind immediately gets focused. So that mind is an unhealthy mind. That mind belongs to the state of called Mudham, where it cannot really concentrate on anything higher and noble. We cannot do any spiritual practice at this state of mind, which is called Kshiptam and Mudham, means highly disturbed. Again, the analogy of the lake is the most appropriate analogy. A lake which is so disturbed, so muddy, like that our mind becomes totally confused. That you don't even recognize any confusion. You are so terribly confused that you don't consider your mind is confused. To be able to understand, I'm a bit confused, you should be a little less confused. Then only you will be able to recognize that you are feeling a confusion. But that second state is called Mudham state. The third state is very common. It's called Vikshiptam. Most of the spiritual seekers, by and large, belong to this category. sometimes the mind becomes highly focused, calm and quiet. When you go to a church or a synagogue, a Buddhist place, or temple, or any place, when you listen to some great ideas, spiritual ideas, immediately mind feels a lot of peace, of tranquility and peace, and you feel a lot of concentration, you feel kind of spontaneous tranquility and peace within. No, but it's not there. After some time, you get back to your home, and then that peace is gone, mind again is disturbed. When you go into our office place, all the challenges and problems and competitions and complexities, all these problems, immediately mind gets highly disturbed. The evening when you take rest and go to a church or in a place of worship, temple or anywhere, or when you read some holy scriptures, when you listen to some wonderful ideas, mind gets very peaceful and calm. So this state of mind is not bad, but it is not good enough. From this state, when we practice more spiritual disciplines, either karma yoga or meditation or prayer, the mind slowly becomes more naturally focused on higher ideas, and the possibility of losing the peace of mind, the distraction, getting distracted, slowly goes down, and for most of the time mind is focused on higher ideas. That state is called Ekagra state, fourth state. How do we reach that state? Vikshipta state, like a pendulum. For some time we are okay, calm and quiet. After some time, that peaceful nature is disturbed. How do we go to the next state? Fourth state, Ekagra, means the stage of concentration, one-pointedness, focus. That is called fourth state, Ekagram state. So Ekagram, concentration. It is possible for us to improve our mind. That's one of the signal contribution of Patanjali system, especially the contributions of the commentators like Vyasa, Shankara, Vijnana Bhikshu, Vajaspati and others. They have put an elaborate literature as being built around Patanjali's 195 Yoga Sutras, which is very tiny piece of literature. So these commentators say, whatever we do, they say that whatever we do, it creates an impression, it becomes a tendency, becomes an aptitude, an attitude, and that actually determines the way we act, the way we do things. It influences our reaction to what we experience around, the way we talk to somebody, the way we react to our own challenges, whether we become highly disturbed or not. That is called a kind of wheel or a rotating wheel. Karma vritti sankalpa, karma vritti samskara sankalpa vasana karma chakram. So it means action, tendencies, impressions, aptitudes, the strong tendencies. Then those tendencies will make us act in a particular manner. Those actions will produce again new tendencies, like that rotating wheel. Now, this is a very important subject because we are going to discuss in the coming verses how to get out of this wheel. Buddha also discussed the same subject in his well-known Ashtanga Marga that we will discuss in course of time. Now, after we reach this fourth state, again when we go further, then our mind becomes naturally focused on one central spiritual idea. When we reach that state, what happens is that devotee will remember me all the time and is always steadfast. His mind is always focused on the central idea. That's the idea behind, spiritual idea. The idea is, this idea repeated in Ananyacheda. It is repeated in the 9th chapter, in the 11th chapter, 12th chapter, 13th chapter. Again and again this idea comes for discussion in the Gita, in this text itself. The 15th and 16th verse discuss, and of course for 15th and 16th and 17th, all these verses discuss certain subjects which are very, very important. Sometimes a bit very difficult to grasp. I shall try my best. Mam upetya punarjarma dukkhalayam ashashvatam napnuvandi mahatmana samsiddhim paramam gataha. Now, when you reach this state, the highest perfection, when you attain this state, then you are no more subject to rebirth. Mamumetya punajjarma dukkhalayam ashashvatam. So you find certain words used here. Dukkhalaya means a house of pain. That's what it means. So, this body, this life is considered to be a house of pain. Why ashashvatam? Because it is changing, it is non-eternal. Anything that is non-eternal is a house of pain. So, anything that is changing, which is non-eternal, is not the highest state. That is again what Buddha actually teaches us. Lord Krishna is giving this instruction for one important reason, In the 8th chapter itself, the 6th chapter, Lord Krishna had to listen to an important complaint from Arjuna. If you go to the 6th chapter, 34th verse, if you take the 6th chapter, 34th verse, there Arjuna complains that his mind is always disturbed. Chanchalam hi mana Krishna Pramati Belavadridam Tasyaham Nigraham Manne Vayoriva Sudushkaram. My mind is always restless, Arjuna says, turbulent, strong in the restlessness. That's why he says, Belavadridam. How can something be restless and also strong? A storm, a tornado, is strong and also it is also an embodiment of restlessness, distraction. So mind is actually in a stormy condition. Mind frequently faces this storm. And I think it's very difficult to control it. It is as difficult to control as it is difficult to control wind, a strong wind, a storm or a tornado. This is Arjuna's complaint that you find in the 34th verse of 8th chapter. Now, Lord Krishna is addressing that problem, and he has already addressed that problem in the 14th verse. How to face that problem? So he says, Ananyacheda Satatam means try to focus your mind on some great ideal all the time without any disturbance. That was that is the answer given. So we have to understand the full implication of this. Because according to Vedanta, our life itself is like a big storm, a strong wind that is blowing or maybe like a tsunami. Why it's so unpleasant? If you have got a wonderful job, a lot of money, wealth, wonderful people, why should we consider this life as something unpleasant? It is some kind of a negative, skeptical interpretation of life. Well, Lord Krishna perhaps did not want everyone to take this view. In fact, Arjuna here, he taught Arjuna this great philosophy of life because Arjuna felt the need for such a healthy philosophy of life. I mentioned this earlier. There were 5 brothers. Yudhishthira was already a philosopher, a settled man. And Bhima, Arjuna's elder brother, Yudhishthira's younger brother, but Arjuna's elder brother, was more of a man of brawn than of brain. He was a wrestler, he was some kind of a big warrior type. But a wonderful man. There are, in the Mahabharata itself, there are wonderful scenes where Bhima himself teaches some high philosophy to his elder brother, Yudhishthira. Sometimes you find a very strong, maybe a wonderful wrestler, maybe boxing champion will have some very wonderful piece of universal wisdom to say. Sometimes you find people who don't read many books, no offense meant, people sometimes don't read many books, they mostly spend their time, like Bhima was doing that. But sometimes he says some wonderful truth. But Arjuna was different. Krishna did not teach Bhima as a student because Arjuna was facing a real problem in life. He had all the wonderful things that he wanted. And he was looking for a higher ideal to guide his activities and his life as a whole. So Krishna chose him as a student. So it doesn't mean that we should be facing a terrible problem to take to spirituality, not at all. But we understand the importance of certain teachings only when we keep in mind the life as such, this embodiment, especially if you look at it as some kind of coming and going, being born, living for a long time, going through pains and pleasures, happiness and unhappiness, one after another, then dying, and again being reborn. Of course, reincarnation is an important part of this philosophy in the Gita. How long will this game continue? Where does it go? And Buddha wanted an answer to this question. So he said, there is dukkha, there is grief, the sorrow, there is cause for sorrow, and there is a way out of it. And then he explained this eightfold disciplines, Samyak Smriti, Samyak Sankalpa, and so on, that we discuss in the coming pages. So, in this context, Lord Krishna says, you have to practice this central focus for a long time, focusing on one spiritual ideal, Ananya Seda. Then your mind, which is naturally disturbed, will become quiet and calm and tranquil. Now, you think of life as a whole. How can we attain eternal absolute peace? As an answer, as a solution to this whole question of embodiment, coming and going, the physical embodiment, we can understand the philosophy that tells us that this physical embodiment itself is a limitation. It is something which needs an improvement. It is certainly not the highest, not the most exalted state that we can attain. To understand this, we have to remember that according to Vedanta, we are one with the absolute transcendental reality. We are not a limited embodied being. We are the all-pervading transcendental spiritual reality. The higher transcendental spiritual awareness is the only answer to the bigger question of coming to this world, going through this life of pain and pleasure and dying and again coming back and again this continuous rotation. That rotating wheel is something that we should come out of, and we can come out of this only when we reach the highest spiritual realization. So that is the subject we are going to discuss now. So this is Mamumedya Punarjanma Dukhalayam Ashashudam Na Apnuvanti. Those who reach the highest perfection, those who attain me, those who get the highest spiritual knowledge, jnana, they will not be subject to rebirth. They will come out of this cycle, this wheel of life, death and rebirth. Because it is a home of pain, dukkhalaya. Now there is another very important message in this. If you can look at our present life, even if you have got lot of money, wonderful job, big house, lot of cars, prestige, everything that you can possibly conceive of, like Buddha. He was a king, he was a prince, he had a wonderful palace, he was going to be proclaimed the next king of his kingdom. His father was preparing for the coronation of the young prince. So he had everything that the richest man in 21st century cannot even conceive of. I mean, relatively speaking. He didn't have a plane because there was no plane at that time. But relatively speaking, he didn't have any problem. But he felt there is a problem. The ability to feel this inner vacuum, in spite of all the wonderful worldly things that you have got, that is the beginning of higher philosophy. That's the beginning of higher human evolution. Not at the physical level. There is an evolution that is possible. No more evolution at the physical level, but there is a higher kind of evolution. And who are those who have made contribution to human civilization? If you look at the history of the world, the greatest men and women who made contribution to the totality of human civilization were those who felt this discontent, this dissatisfaction with everything that they had in this world. Still they were looking for something beyond the present, beyond the body, beyond the bank balance, beyond the job, beyond the car, beyond the house, beyond the checkbook and fountain pen, so to speak, as a metaphor. From them, we gain the utmost. A Buddha or a Christ or a Shankaracharya or a Sri Ramakrishna, these are the persons who made life really livable, worth living. Relatively speaking, maybe Ramses II, the Egyptian king living 3rd millennium BC, he had a much more luxurious life than today's billionaires and trillionaires, relatively speaking, comparatively speaking. So, these comforts and enjoyment are related to the physical embodiment. In spite of all that, and still look at the mummies and the pyramids. I'm not going to the stories, You don't want to be like that anyway. If you look at good Washington DC, any museum, look at a mummy. Can you ever imagine? I would like to be like that mummy. But that mummy was a big prince or a king once upon a time. The most powerful king, Ramses II. The most famous one, perhaps, 3rd century. 3rd millennium BC. So you want to be like that. So there is something that goes beyond everything that we can attain in this world. Beyond the checkbook and fountain pen that I mentioned. That's why Lord Krishna says, Mamupetya punajjanma dukkhalayam ashashvatam. So this life is house of pain, house of grief, house of sorrow, house of tears. So we should always remember, it is not a negative, skeptical interpretation of life, not at all. Rather, it is the most exalted interpretation of human life and human existence. Because Lord Krishna is asking us to go to the next level of evolution. What is the evolution? The evolution where we go beyond the physical embodiment. That's the idea behind. So, again, as I mentioned, that's what Buddha also did. And he left his palace, everything, he wanted to sit under a tree, he sat under a tree. And in the words of the author of Buddha, Achugosha, Buddha Vijaya, he says, Ikasane sushudu me shariram tugasti mamsam chivirayam chayatuhu aprapi siddhim bhujanma durlabham naivasanat kaya madashalishire. Buddha's strong resolve. Mind you, and he became a Buddha, whom the whole world recognizes today. Suppose he had remained in his palace, would have been the crown prince after the next king after his father had passed away. Perhaps Buddha's astrologers, it seems the royal astrologers predicted that he became an emperor of the world or an emperor of the ascetics. He became an emperor of the world or an emperor of the ascetics, but he became an emperor of ascetics. And he said, I will sit under this tree, Bodhgaya, and till I get the highest realization, I won't get up from here, let my body perish, it be reduced to bones and flesh and marrow still, without getting the highest wisdom, I won't get up from here. Because he also thought, this world is dukkhalayam ashashvatam. Ashashvatam means changing, not shashvata, not eternal, momentary. So that's why he talks about nirvana. When you attain nirvana, you get out of the praditya samutpada, this cycle of birth, life, death and rebirth. The same idea more or less continues in the next verse, 16th. Abrahma bhuvanan lokaha punaravartina arjuna mamumeti tu kaundeya duk punarjanma navidyate. So you can find certain words are used here in the coming verse also. Loka. Lokyati iti loka. Loka, one interpretation that we can do is it's not a place where you live, but it is a level of existence. So, even the Brahma Loka, all the worlds, including Brahma Loka, the realm of Brahman, not Brahman, please, Brahma, that's a Prajapati, that's a meaning. You can say something creator God, the Hindu monotheistic equivalent of creator God, one of the Hindu trinities. Brahma is not Brahman. Brahman is the highest monistic, Advaitic spiritual ideal. It's an impersonal, attributeless, transcendental reality. Brahma is the word. In fact, that's the term that unfortunately, maybe better for us to remember, when Emerson wrote these four verses, Brahma, the English pronunciation with problem of pronunciation and also spelling is B-R-A-H-M-A. What he must have meant is Brahman. Brahman is the absolute transcendental reality. It is not the name of a person, it's not the name of a monotheistic God, it is the name of the absolute, transcendental, all-pervading, immanent reality, with the source of the origin of the entire creation. It exists in that Brahman, it comes from that Brahman, it gets dissolved back into that Brahman. Everything emerges from it, everything exists in it, and everything will get dissolved into it. That is Brahman. So we should remember maybe when you read immersion, better remember Brahman will be the correct spelling for Emerson's poem, because actually his poem is a wonderful and absolutely marvelous piece of literature in just 4 verses. The highest spiritual philosophy from the transcendentalist point of view is enshrined here. Here in this particular 16th verse is Brahma Bhuvana Loka. So here Brahma Loka here means Brahma long. Brahma means creator God. The monotheistic creator God. It is said that according to Hindu mythology, there are different levels of existence. And in the coming verses you find one daytime in Brahma's life is equivalent to 1000 yugas. And I will tell you what a yuga implies. 1000 yuga is one daytime, 12 hours in Brahma's life, and 1000 yugas is one night, another 12 hours. That means 2000 yugas constitute one full day and night of Brahma's life. And what is a yuga? Yuga means 4 cycles of time. So, Satya Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dwapara Yuga, Kali Yuga. These are the 3 yugas. Of Kali Yuga, according to present calculation, we are now somewhere, we have completed 5,000 years since the beginning of Kali Yuga. And we have yet to go almost 428,000 or 429,000 years yet to go. So 429,000 years yet to go. That is Kali Yuga. It is one of the 4 yugas. All together called one yuga. And 1000 yuga is one daytime of Brahma. So what it means is, I don't know, no, I'm not going to this mythology, but once if you can remember the age of creation, the age of existence, the billions of years, if you can imagine the age of creation, not the earth alone, then perhaps all this will fit into that calculus. So I'm not going to those details. We are going to discuss that in the coming verse. So what the 16th verse tells us is simple. All the levels of existence, including the highest Brahma, Prajapati, creator of everything, the cosmic reality, including the realm of Brahma, are subject to return. I mean, they all belong to the level of relativity. They come, they go, they undergo changes. But if you attain me, if you realize, attain this absolute reality, then you will be free from the cycles of birth, death, life and rebirth. I mean, you will be free from these transmigratory cycles. Even Brahma is not free, but anyone who attains Brahma Jnanam can be free from this transmigratory cycle. So the central message here is simple. If we can remember that this present life, this embodied being, embodied existence, and all that goes along with that, the job, the rivalries, the struggles, the money, the wealth, the fights and wars and conflicts, all these belong to a lower order of reality, a lower understanding of the reality. The relative belong to the realm of the changing, the non-eternal. If you can remember that, perhaps this itself can make us more level-headed in our everyday life, can make us more mature, and can again, as I often use the word, it can give us spiritually we can have better common sense. Because if we remember, everything that we have, we cannot run away from it. We do not, and we cannot, and we should not run away from the realities around. But whenever our interaction, our activities get us to the point of disturbing our peace of mind, tranquility, then we can soothe as a healing touch. We can use this great teaching from the Gita. Everything belongs to the changing, the non-eternal, the transient, the momentary. And that Buddha realized when he was 28 years old. And as a result, he became the enlightened Buddha. So, that is the great teaching in these verses. We will continue our discussion in the next session. You are most welcome with questions. Most welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you.
I am very taken with some of the poetic language in verse 14, which focuses on idealism and constancy. The words that strike me, and I'm wondering if you can elaborate on the poetry here, is nityasya, and then repeat it again, nitya yuktasya. So the various translations I've looked at has that as thinking constantly, like an adverb in the first place, and then adjectively, and it gets repeated. This is the technique that we see in the Gita a lot, where the word gets repeated. But here the emphasis then is that if you're able to think constantly, then you are constant in your yogic concentration.
Thank you for that question. I'm very grateful to you for putting this question. Now look at the verse. Ananyacheda sadam yomam smarat nityashaha. Nityashaha means constantly and daily, all the time, without a break. Constantly, daily, all the time, without a break. That is nityashaha. Other one, nitya yuktasya yoginaha. Nitya yuktasya here is an adjective of yoginaha. So, a yogi should be nitya yukta. What means? He should be always steadfast in his yoga. Yoga means in his spiritual wisdom, he should be always steadfast. So, a yogi should be nitya yukta. All the time is feeling this union, his identity with the universal reality. Because yoga itself implies union with the individual self and the universal self. Every minute, constantly, all the time. Nitya means all the time, every day, constantly. That's the meaning of nitya. Nitya yukta means a person is a yukta, also means yogi. Is a yogi every minute, yogi every second. Is a yogi in every word he speaks, in every action he does, in every thought he thinks. You see, Shankaracharya has got a wonderful commentary in this. I can just read and explain. What Shankaracharya says, here he says, Sadatam iti nairantiryam uchyate, nityashaka iti dirghakalatvam uchyate. Means for a long time, not for a short time. Means all the time. Because as I mentioned, there is no holiday, there is no break, there is no weekend in spiritual life. Because if there is the slightest break, there is always a chance that we may not come back again. So you can find, surprisingly, in the Hindu mythological books, you find a spiritual seeker meditating in a forest, but he was disturbed by something. And that disturbance actually delayed his spiritual realization by several life cycles. You can find the story of Jadabharata. These stories are really marvelous. Jadabharata was a king, a emperor, who left his palace, went to a forest, sat on the banks of a river. He put up a small tent, hut, and started meditation and spiritual practices. Because he relinquished, he renounced all his kingdom, comforts, everything. So he had renounced everything and he come there. So one day, we know what happened. He was sitting after his meditation. He was sitting looking at the sky or something. Then he found a small deer was being chased by a lion. In fact, it was a mother deer. He was pregnant. As the deer crossed the stream out of fear because the lion was chasing the deer, chasing her, she gave birth to a baby deer which fell into the water and it started floating in the water. And the mother deer which gave birth to this baby deer passed away, died. The king, out of compassion, jumped into the river, saved the baby deer, and that deer began to grow up in that hermitage. Now what happened? This is one stage. What happened? In course of time, the king began to think, well, I'm expected to protect this baby deer. My duty is to protect this baby deer. I should look after her. So when he became too old, by the time he had completely forgotten his meditation, his spiritual practices, everything, he devoted his whole lifetime just for looking after the deer. And he was worried about what will happen to the baby deer after his passing away, and he was born as a deer. But then all the spiritual practices he had done in his previous life when he was a king or renounced everything, all these he remembered. So when he was born as a deer, because he was focusing on the deer, he was born as a deer, what happened, he just stayed within the ashrama compound. He didn't come out of it because he enjoyed that place. He didn't want to come out. He could not bear the wide forest around, and he passed away. And he was born as a great mystic. He's called Jadabharata. For all appearance, he was dead, but he was a great yogi, a great enlightened rishi, saint and saint. So what it means is, he should have looked after that baby deer, but he should not have forgotten his own spiritual practices. So what it means is, continuous practice is important. If there is a break, during that break, one may lose one's attention. You won't lose the wealth of spiritual practices you have done. That will be with you, but you may get delayed in your spiritual enlightenment. You find in Buddha's dialogue with his disciples, he also brings similar stories from Hindu mythology. If you look at the Jataka tales and Buddha's own stories and examples, they're all taken from Hindu mythology. Buddha also brings out, you should be alert, you should be steadfast. So the idea is, in this particular 14th verse, which is very beautiful and poetical, as you mentioned, what it says is, Nitya Shaka means all the time, constantly, without a break. That is Nitya Shaka. And so another word, but Nitya Yukta means a yogi, who is always a yogi, steadfast. And Nitya Yukta is an adjective of yogina. That's the idea behind. And one important word is Tasyagam Sulabha Partha. Lord Krishna says, if you are so steadfast, constantly, all the time, remembering the supreme truth, then Shankaracharya says, Sukhena Labhyaka means, Sulabha means, you can easily attain me. The continuous, unbroken practice. That's the idea. Okay? You can find even great painters, thinkers, musicians. When do they write something really great? When they're contemplating on something and with one-pointed attention, then something great emerges in the mind, and that writes. Suppose if you take a decision to every day from 8 morning to 9 o'clock I shall write the poetry, that poetry won't be worth reading. But if you're walking in the forest, if you're sitting on a river bank, and if a great idea comes to you, if you write down, that can become a classic. So what it means is when our mind reaches a point of what you call complete focus, identification with the great idea, constantly, nityasha, all the time, then only we bang on the doors of Brahman. Actually, we knock at the doors of real wisdom. That's what happens. Yeah.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you. Thank you.
Pranam Swami.
Yeah,
there is a question from YouTube.
Yeah.
How do we remember God at all times?
Yeah.
That was the question.
Yeah, of course, Gita's teaching we should keep in mind. To begin with, one should try to practice some disciplines in the morning and evening, or if mornings and evenings are not convenient, whatever time is available, because we have to begin from where we stand right now. And along with that, our time and attention, whatever is available, our resources should be diverted to feeding our mind with spiritual food. Spiritual food means spiritual ideas. Somehow if we can connect our mind with some spiritual ideas, that will help us to constantly remember. Sri Ramakrishna, in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, you find, if you have a toothache, then you may be doing your work, but you will be remembering your toothache all the time. Sri Ramakrishna gives a simple example. Of course, that constant remembering is an advanced state. So we can begin somewhere. So morning and evening, if we do some spiritual disciplines, at other times we can think in a bag, keep this idea in our bag, somewhere in our mind, that will help us to constantly bring our mind back to the spiritual idea. So we should not aspire to begin where Lord Krishna, with the idea that Lord Krishna recommends here, because there's an advanced state. But once we have a good beginning, slowly we will be able to remember more and more frequently our spiritual idea. This idea. Those of you who are interested in these practices, you are most welcome to visit Vedanta Society. Maybe you can write to me, send an email, and of course, if you are in the Bay Area, it's easier. Otherwise, you can send an email. If you are in the Bay Area, after we reopen the temple sometime in September, October, you can directly visit the Vedanta Society and discuss. Okay. So thank you for the questions. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Swami.